My name is Maurice Nightingale. I'm actually, at the moment, I'm part of the Church Life Leadership and Planting Network for ELF. And this is sort of a one-off workshop on one aspect of that, looking at just how important it is to raise and multiply leaders. Absolutely critical for any task, the outcome of mission, multiplying missioners, multiplying spiritual leadership for strengthening existing churches, planting new churches, whatever expression or scale or size that might be, we need leaders. So we just want to explore in the next hour or so just how do we identify leaders, how do we intentionally develop leaders. We always need leaders. We never have enough leaders. So how do we go about this? So I just want to, first of all, just talk a little bit about some principles of multiplication, because that might just help set a little bit of context for us as we then start to think about multiplying leaders. I mean, multiplication is a constant theme throughout Scripture. Genesis 1:28, be fruitful and multiply. This sort of command is repeated several times at crucial points in the early narratives, and particular point to bear in mind in Genesis 1 and verse 24 is that each should reproduce according to its kind. That's the English translation. I don't know how that translates in some other languages, but there's a principle of reproduction that we reproduce after ourselves, according to our own DNA, if you like. And that's a principle of multiplication, is that it's much easier to reproduce yourself than to reproduce someone else or something else. So animals reproduce after their own kind, after their own DNA, but also you're going to find it much more straightforward to reproduce someone who is in your gifting or in your particular area of ministry. So that's one of the principles of multiplication to bear in mind. We know that Jesus restates this in Matthew 28 verse 18, where he says, go and make disciples of all nations. So whereas the command in to Adam and to Noah and so on was to go and populate, multiply, and be fruitful and fill the earth with many children and families and households and tribes. For us, it's restated in a spiritual manner that we should go and fill the earth with disciples of Jesus in every tongue, tribe, and nation. That's the same principle of multiplication restated. So we have this same command upon us to be fruitful and to multiply, making disciples to fill the earth in all nations, every tongue, tribe, and nation. So it's an important principle of reproducing after our own kind, as I said. Reproducing, what does that look like for us spiritually? Well, it looks like raising up disciples of Christ. So we're looking to raise up according to the DNA of Jesus, shaping, looking to shape them in every way to the kind, to be like Christ. As in Antioch, they were accused of being like Christ. Well, that's exactly what we want to create. We want to create people who are day by day being conformed to the likeness of Christ, but also looking to reproduce ourselves in terms of character and gifting and ministry, reproducing according to our DNA. So this is some principles of multiplication. We see Paul's example in 2 Timothy 3. Paul gives a very helpful summary of what it means to raise a son or a daughter, according to his own kind. So he says this in verse 10. He says, you, however, have followed my teaching, my conduct, my aim in life, my faith, my patience, my love, my steadfastness, my persecutions and sufferings that happened to me at Antioch, at Iconium, and at Lystra, which persecutions I endured, yet from them all the Lord rescued me. So he's presenting a very sort of intimate context, and we'll come back to that and unpack that a little bit later on. And then he goes on to say, but as for you, continue in what you have learned and what you have firmly believed, knowing from whom you learned it. You learned it from watching Paul's life, but also how from childhood you've been acquainted with the sacred writings, which are able to make you wise for salvation through faith in Christ Jesus. So you get an appreciation that this is a deeper level of connection or relationship than just a teacher or an advisor or even just a mentor. There was a proximity. There was Paul's life was completely open to Timothy as he was raising him up as a son, raising him up as a leader. You know, Timothy was familiar with his teaching, with how he conducted himself, with the aims and ambitions and aspirations of his life, with the way his faith worked in principle and in practice. How Paul was patient, loving, steadfast. Paul was able to say to Timothy, you know this, you've seen this. So he's got this very healthy relationship, sort of between a father or a mother and a son or a daughter. This is central to how we can observe that Paul interacted with Timothy in this. He's appealing to this relationship with Timothy. He says, you know me, you know what I've been through, you know how I've carried this, you know my aims and ambitions, behavior and attitudes, you know my personal culture. And he then goes on to encourage Timothy to do likewise with others, which we'll come back to a little bit later on. So this describes something of Paul's personal discipleship culture. And he's distinguishing this from the authority of the sacred writings, saying, no, continue in what you have learned and believed, and, from me, but also you've been acquainted with the sacred writings. So there's no he's not confusing those two things. You say you need both. You need the sacred writings, and then you need this discipling relationship with me. So I think we could be sure if any one of us lived with Paul, and he was a father through the gospel to us, and we were well acquainted with the sacred writings, and also well acquainted with Paul, his teaching and conduct, and all of these things that we've listed, and we were committed to learning from him and being in imitating him, then inevitably we would find ourselves being raised up as a son or a daughter according to his personal and ministry culture. So this is the part of the example that we're seeing here from Paul. I think this does make it relevant to all cultures and contexts, because relationship transcends cultures and contexts. So when we're looking to be raising up sons and daughters, leaders, disciples in other nations, in other cultures and contexts, Paul doesn't really, in a sense, appeal to these things. He's appealing to attributes of leadership which transcend this. So as we imitate Christ and not our own specific culture, we can encourage people of every culture to imitate us. So in that context, it's so important to be aware of our own cultural shape or preferences, drawing the distinction between what is a biblical culture and what is a cultural preference. If we want to learn to raise up men and women of leadership from a culture that is different to ours, it is absolutely vital to be aware of this. It is so important to be sensitive to this. So what are the biblical, Christ-shaped aspects of leadership and discipleship culture? And how do you distinguish that from my own cultural preferences or the ways that I may have learned to do this in our own culture. This is, we could spend the whole session working on that one aspect, but absolutely critical to learning how to raise up sons and daughters in other cultures. It's important to note that this raising leaders should be a preoccupation of leadership. You know, I've read some leadership books where it says it should actually, for any leader, 80% of our time should be focused on raising up other leaders. I don't know whether that might be more than any of us could sustain, but it's just emphasizing how important it is. You know, in terms of serving our future needs of mission, and you know, or building church, strengthening existing churches, planting new churches, raising up ministries to be sent out, you know, serving the community, mercy mission, whatever it might be. We've got to raise leaders, and we're looking to raise up sons and daughters who are familiar with our ways, and that we can nurture them and coach them into their own effectiveness. So it should be a preoccupation for every one of us in leadership. You know, Paul says to Timothy in 2 Timothy 2, you know, what you've heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. So, you know, you're very familiar with this sense of 3 generations here, you know, Paul, Timothy, and those that he's able to entrust as well. You know, Bill Hybels, you know, quote from him, for emerging leaders to become seasoned and wise and effective leaders, they need proximity and interaction with veteran leaders. So let's, for the sake of this workshop, consider us all in here. We are veteran leaders, and if you want to raise up other leaders, they need time with you, they need proximity to you, they need interaction with you. This is what Paul is describing. You know, you're familiar with my everything. My life is an open book to you. You know, there's not a distance. I'm not sort of putting myself on a platform or pedestal away from you. I'm saying, no, you come, see how it works out for me. See how it works out when it's not going well. See how it works out when I'm under pressure. See how it works out when I face disappointment or persecution. See how it works out with my wife or husband or my kids. You know, see how it works out in my day-to-day life. And then this is the environment in which you're going to be trained and raised up. So John Maxwell would say all good mentoring relationships begin with a personal relationship. Is, you know, for mentoring to go to its deepest level, there has to be a development of that personal relationship. So this is all just really speaking about some principles of multiplication. I'm going to look on in a moment into some more practical elements of that. But I just want to say, really just a sort of a pause moment here, just to ask yourself the question, where are the leaders going to come from in terms of your area of, or arena of responsibility now? So each of you representing different areas of ministry, church life, mission, and so on. Each of us looking to reproduce after our own kind, as we said at the beginning. Each of us looking to raise up other leaders and ministers, spiritual sons and daughters. Where will the leaders come from? Perhaps you're part of a very well-established network or denomination, and there are sort of leadership development machines, but your sort of mechanisms or programs. But you know, we have to find and raise up leaders ourselves as well. You know, this is part of discipleship. If you're a leader or someone with an area of responsibility or ministry, then all of us, every one of us has a responsibility to reproduce ourselves, to multiply according to our own kind. So where are those leaders going to come from? Are you spotting them? This is just sort of a midpoint question for you just to ponder. Where are your leaders coming from? Can you see them? What are the pathways? Is it new disciples that are being saved that you can train and raise up? You see their potential and you're starting to see them emerge. Is it existing Christians that come and join your church or your ministry or your mission, and you think, right, I can see the potential in you and I'm going to start investing in you and raising you up? Is it Christians that you go and recruit? You say, come and join us. Come, I want you to come and be part of this. And I'm gonna take an interest in seeing you raised up and develop your potential. So I'm just asking you the question. We're going to look at some more practicalities in a moment, then I'll open this up for discussion. But just as we're at the sort of midpoint here, who do you see in terms of your ministry or church or responsibility that you carry? But even beyond that, really, just in terms of the ministry, the passion for mission, the thing that God has laid on your heart where you're bearing fruit in ministry or leadership, who do you see? Who is your Timothy or Timothea? Who is your son or daughter in the Lord? You think, I'm going to raise you up. I'm going to multiply myself. And I can see the potential in this son or daughter or number of sons or daughters, and I'm going to invest in them and see them raised up and see them go further than me, put everything I have into them and see them go further than me. Who have you got? Who would be on your list? So let's move on then. What sort of leaders are we looking for? This is sort of a checklist of things that I look for when I'm looking for people that I really want to invest in. And it's all to do with inspiration. I want to see, I'm looking for people who are inspired by the King and his kingdom. First and foremost, they're not inspired by a ministry role or even a social concern. First and foremost, if you strip everything else away, they're inspired by the King, and they're inspired to see his kingdom come, your kingdom come, and your will be done. That's got to be right at the heart of anybody that we want to invest in and see them develop. You say, yes, they are first and foremost, before anything else, they're inspired by Jesus. And, someone once said to me, if we lead people to Jesus, he will do the rest. If people are following Jesus, they're going to get it. They're going to understand it. They're going to, half the work is done if they're already, completely, overwhelmed by their relationship with Jesus and consumed with that. So we're looking for those, looking for leaders. You might find some people, they look good and they do the job and they look impressive. But are they inspired by the King? First and foremost, non-negotiable. Secondly, are they, in the context of church planting, are they inspired by the church? And often, the church is much less than we want it to be. It's not as inspiring as we would dream it should be. But the church is absolutely central to the kingdom purposes of Jesus. He came to build his church. When people are saved, whatever ministry or mission that we represent, whenever they're saved, they are added to the church of Jesus Christ. And so we want people to be inspired by the church. We need to build churches that are inspiring, but we want people who love the church. Jesus said, I laid my life down for the church. We're disciples of Jesus. Well, we lay our lives down for the church as well. We're here to see the gathered, redeemed, called out people of God. And I'm looking for people, and our nations need this. Our nations need a kingdom countercultural community, which is the people of God, the church, saying, if we do it God's way, it goes well with us. He's the King. The government is on his shoulders. We shape our communities around the King. It will go well for us. That's what the church is. So I'm looking for people who are inspired by the church, not thinking that somehow the church is not relevant. Maybe some ways the church expresses itself are not relevant, but the church is always relevant, the church of Jesus Christ. And so I'm looking for people who are inspired by that. People who are inspired by the values that we're building to. So that might express itself in slightly different ways according to where you are ministering. But we're building to a pattern, whether it's a mission, the ethos of a ministry, the values of a church. We have a pattern. This is how we're building. It's not a free for all. It's not where whatever you want, believe what you want. No, hang on. So I'm looking for people. If I'm looking to reproduce leaders, I'm looking for men and women who are inspired by the values that I'm building to, and that will be the same for each one of you. Whatever your arena of ministry, inspired by our vision, not looking to, if they're going, maybe I'm raising up a leader that will go off and do something else somewhere else, that's fine. If I'm raising up a leader that's going to be part of the ministry or the mission or the church that I'm building, then I want them to be inspired by our vision, not be trying to pull things over to another vision, two vision, division, it's hugely important. No, we're working together. We're building something here. And perhaps I raise up a leader that I release to something else, but if I'm working together, we're working to a vision, and we've got dreams, and people are attracted to big dreams. So we want them to be inspired by that vision, inspired to serve. So important. Jesus said, I have come not to be served, but to serve. Now, if Jesus came to serve, then a servant heart has to be absolutely at the center of what we understand by ministry and leadership. And it's the ultimate fruit of mature character, is a heart and a desire to serve, not aspiring for position, not aspiring just to be someone important in an organization. No, I'm here to serve. That's what I'm after. And I'm looking for that. When I'm looking to develop leaders, someone who loves to serve. And this one, maybe a little bit of a surprise in some ways, but you have got all of us, a massive part to play in inspiring the people around us. So, I'm looking for people actually that I can inspire. I can inspire them. It's more important perhaps than we realize. Our lives are the letter that other people read. For many people who aren't Christians, our lives are the Bible that they read. They don't open the Bible, but they'll see the Bible worked out in our lives. And so we inspire people by our zeal, by our commitment, by our passion, by our devotion. We're inspiring people. They think, I want to be like that. I want to go where you're going. And we need to learn that balance. It's not about us, it's about him. But as we follow him, we inspire others. And it's so important. It's so important. People will look at you and they will be inspired by in the same way that Paul was appealing to Timothy and saying that my ways, my steadfastness, my faith, my love, be inspired by that, imitate that. Well, then we must be bold to display a life that is inspirational, authentic, genuine, but inspirational. And this is how we will. So these are the sort of leaders that I'm looking for. People who are inspired by these things. So some of the practicalities, just before we open this up for discussion, I'm inspired. I'm really helped by Paul's letter to Titus, obviously speaking about a particular ministry situation in Crete. It's probably an episode that happened after the book of Acts, a post-Acts 28 event, as we would say. And they're on the island of Crete. They'd seen converts in several communities. And Paul left Titus behind to get the emerging church organized, straighten out what was left unfinished, says in verse 5, and appoint elders in every town. So here's an example of appointing leaders and what was important. And obviously this is specifically talking about eldership, but the principles apply for leadership in all arenas. If you are multiplying mission or multiplying ministry or multiplying churches, you need to multiply leaders in all areas and arenas. And the important thing is, when we look at Titus 1 verses 6 to 9, when it looks at the criteria for leadership, you cannot evaluate these criteria outside of knowing someone well. You have to know them well to be able to make an evaluation of what their reputation is with outsiders, how their children behave, whether they are given to anger or too much wine. You can't evaluate that if you don't know someone. So when you have these sort of leadership, I don't want to offend anybody. When you have these sort of, when I say this, but when you see sort of a leadership advert in a magazine saying apply here, and someone comes along and they preach with a view, and then they meet, and then you think, well, how do you get to know someone in those circumstances to evaluate them in this way? So to raise up quality leadership does require this sort of proximity in order to enable us to evaluate these attributes that we read about, for example, in Titus 1 verses 6 to 9. You need to know people well to identify these attributes and characteristics. So other things to comment on in terms of practicalities, it's always helpful if you can to develop oversized leadership teams to serve your current needs, but also to serve future needs. Some people in your team will move on to other things, and so always be looking to sort of develop oversized teams so that you've got capacity to send people, to release people, if people need to retire, or if they need to stand back for any reason, or if your ministry is going to multiply, you've already got if your teams are already oversized, then you can start to multiply your teams. Giving ourselves to raising leaders. I mentioned this earlier, that it should be a primary preoccupation for us as leaders to reproduce ourselves, taking a deep personal interest in the development of other leaders, not in a sense outsourcing it, but saying, no, I see you and I'm going to get to know you. I'm going to take a deep personal interest in you and I'm going to see you develop and emerge. So I set myself sort of the target of, this is just me personally, it'd be different for each of us. Can I raise up 10 leaders every 3 years? Can I do that? Bring them through, see them released into wider responsibility and carrying more load and sharing the load. Am I able to do it? I sort of set myself this, I'm fascinated. I'm absolutely deeply invested in looking to raise up leaders. Maybe you're in an environment where you say, Maurice, I hear what you're saying, but look, I'm on my own here. I'm struggling here. I'm working in a town and all the young people are leaving. How can I? Well, I often think to myself, well, if God has called us, he will call others. So I just want to say that to you if you're feeling a little bit isolated and thinking, Maurice, this all sounds great in theory, but I'm not sure how this is going to work for me in practice. I outworked these principles, firstly, in one of the most rural areas of my country in England here, very rural area. The sort of area, every country has it. People call it the graveyard of evangelists and da-da-da-da-da-da. Well, I worked this out in this environment first and foremost. And what I learned was, if you don't give vision to people around you, someone else will. And just trying to learn to trust God that if he called me, he's going to call others as well. So I just want to encourage you, if you feel isolated or in an arena at the moment where you think, it's just me, I don't know, I haven't got anybody else to train. Well, if he called you, he'll call others. Personally, disciple, spend time with potential and emerging leaders. As we have discussed this already many times, invest in them, make it a priority, open your life up to them, catch up their hearts, sharing the stories, the ups and the downs. In 2 Corinthians 8:16, Paul says, thanks be to God who put into the heart of Titus the same earnest care I have for you. It's beautiful. So here's Paul, he's raising up Titus, and as he's sharing the ministry with Titus and all the things that he's responsible for, Titus caught Paul's heart and said, hey, I feel the same way. So we're catching up hearts in what we're doing. Testing abilities, training people in knowledge and skills and character, get them involved. Character of the heart, absolutely primary in terms of leadership development. How do we invest in that? Well, be intentional, sit people down, talk about what it means to developing godly character, self-discipline, self-awareness, all these things. Take time to do that. I've got three groups of men and women at the moment, different groups, and I meet them each month. 4 groups. I meet them each month, and I'm talking to them about godly character, how to learn and grow in these things, head knowledge. What do they need to learn? What training would it be helpful for them to have? Skills. What skills do they have, and how can we help them grow, expose them to experience that will help them develop in their skills, and so on. Very quickly, hindrances, just before we open this up to questions. What can hinder us in raising leaders? Very quickly, firstly, we may not see it as a priority. We have to remember that Christian ministry is not about programs and projects, it's about people. And people must be a priority. And among the very first things Jesus did in his public ministry was identify those that he was raising up. It's got to be a priority, but sadly, too often leaders haven't identified it as a priority, and then they've got no one to hand things over to, or no one to release or send, or no one to multiply. And not seen as urgent, maybe something to think about tomorrow. Well, I think about this every day, and I think every leader should. Too busy doing stuff to actually train other people to do it. Well, then you've got to readjust your priorities. Too insecure. What about my role? If I train someone else up, I might be threatened. They might be better than me. Well, man, we've got to be bigger than that. Surely, not be threatened by the ability of others around us, but actually be thrilled that God is raising up others around us, and trust him by faith for our own future. Not be threatened by others coming along. I was team leader of my local church here. To release me to do more traveling, I handed over to a younger guy, and in 2 years he's doubled the size of the church. Well, he hasn't. The Lord, through him, the church has doubled in size. And I've had to work on my ego a little bit about that, but I'm thrilled with that. I'm thrilled that he's just doing such a good job. We mustn't be threatened by the ability of others around us. But sometimes we can be overprotective. We try to maintain standards. If you're going to train and raise up others, you have to allow some standards to drop sometimes if they're going to learn and grow. If you're always only the best person to do something and you can't allow someone else to do it because the standard will drop, you will never raise up leaders around you. Okay, this is a family, it's not a business. Or maybe we can be too impatient, either too impatient to let people develop. We think, we can't wait for that. We haven't got the time to wait for them to develop. We've got to get on. Well, no, don't be impatient. Be patient with people. Let them develop. Let them make mistakes. Let them get it wrong. And then coach them through to getting it better, doing it better next time. Let's not be impatient. It takes time. It takes time to nurture and raise up leaders around us. Okay. So I've spoken a little bit longer than I hope to do, but I just want to provoke us to think about this in your own situation. I put some questions there. So I asked a question earlier: who do you see? Who are the leaders that you see? The emerging potential around you, particularly those that you think, hey, I could develop them according to my own strengths and my own kind. Therefore, if you see them, how much intentional time are you spending with them? How visible is your life, your ways, your values and vision? How personally accessible and vulnerable are you with those leaders that you're looking to disciple around you?